Hi. Thank you for attending today's reading. Let's begin. A story my mom told me once. A journalist went to an insane asylum to interview a young man years after a manslaughter charge. He sat in an interview room and in walked a clean, well-dressed, calm gentleman. The journalist asked usual questions about the man's childhood and what could have led him to commit such a crime. After a while, the journalist asked, "You were found innocent by reason of insanity and sentenced to this asylum. Why do you think that is?" Quote, the young man sighed heavily and replied, "I was in jail waiting for my trial. My cellmate was a repeat offender, telling me all these terrible stories about prison and showing me his scars from prison fights and getting shanked. I was terrified. I didn't want to go to prison at all. I asked if he knew a way to avoid prison time and he suggested convincing the court I was insane. So I did everything I could. I thought was crazy. I talked to the voices in my head. I picked at my scalp until I started bleeding, tearing my hair out, anything I could think of. The court bought it and sent me here. After a month, I knew I didn't need to be here. I told my doctor I didn't belong here, that I wasn't crazy. I was acting for the court. He didn't believe me. He actually prescribed stronger medication and more therapy sessions, trying to keep me calm and complacent. Then I had a thought. If I acted normal and convinced them I was sane, they'd let me out, like how acting insane got me in here. And how's that working for you?" the journalist asked, interested in his story. "I did everything I was told. I took my medication. I cleaned up after myself. I showered daily, ate all my food, went to my therapy sessions and complied with my doctor without question. I found out that if I just took the prison time, I'd be out and home by now. It was too easy to convince them I was insane, but it's so hard to convince people you're sane. I'm no closer to getting out than I was when I started." The journalist finished his interview and spoke with the young man's doctor asking, "Why is he still here? He seems rather calm and reformed to me." "Seems calm and reformed? Yes," the doctor replied. "Yet we've found that the worse off people are, the harder they'll try to convince you they're fine." End of story. Next story. Killer versus killer. When a serial killer breaks into a house, then begins the chase of cat and mouse. The game of a predator and the prey. Reading time. 14.47 minutes. Chapter 1. The chances. There was something eerie about that evening. The wind was witnessing the gloom that covered the city. Street lights were trying to light up every dark corner as if they were afraid that if they didn't, something sinister might develop. A stray dog was lurking in the street, looking for something to eat. It stopped to smell a piece of garbage beside the pedestrian path. It was trying to decide if the piece was edible just when its eyes lit up, and its head jerked up in response to the sudden development. I turned on the light of the living room and looked outside the window at the stray dog, who stared at me for a second and then went along to do whatever it was doing. I looked across the street and the hazy sky. It was so calm that one wouldn't suspect a thing before stepping out of his home. I looked around at all the other houses in the streets. Their blinds were closed as if they didn't want to witness such a gloomy night. As if they wanted to skip this evening. I thought I should too, so I closed my blinds too, but when I turned away from the window, I wondered if I could skip the evening. I realized I could, but the thing was, I didn't want to. How many times does one get a chance like this? I looked at the clock on the wall. It was about to be 8. Oh, they're not gonna be back before 11. I've got 3 hours to do anything I want. I said out loud, just out of the excitement that I had there. house for myself for 3 hours. I lunged at the couch, reached out to grab the remote and turned on the television. I could watch whatever I wanted. I was surfing through the channels when my eyes caught the headline on a news channel, Serial Killer at Large. I stopped and started watching the news. The reporter was speaking. The police cannot even confirm if the murder was committed by the same killer. So does that mean that there could be more than one killer operating in the city? Quote, "Holy shit. I thought. 2 serial killers loose around the city. I wondered what were the chances they both end up at the same place. There is no need to panic right now," the officer who the reporter was interviewing spoke. He did not seem very confident about his words. "We are not sure if this is the same killer, but we are investigating. Meanwhile, I suggest everyone stay calm and report anything suspicious around you." Oh boy. Single quote. I realized I was hungry. I turned the television off and went into the kitchen, right next to the living room. I opened the fridge but closed immediately. I am going to cook myself, I thought. Half an hour later, the kitchen was filled with the smell of heating oil, spices, and freshly cut tomatoes and onions. And I had turned the television back on just for background noise and honestly because I could do it. I sat back on the couch with my dinner. I wanted to enjoy it, watching a sitcom. I was looking for one, but again, I stopped on the news channel. I don't know why. The reporter was extensively explaining the differences between the last 2 incidents. But the second one, which happened the night before, was all across the city. The victim was alone in the house. Her husband was away for work. Then they cut to the interview of a neighbor. Her husband was out of town for 2 days. It was unfortunate that the killer came across the neighborhood just when she was alone. They cut to another one. I had felt like someone just walked across my window. I just think he didn't bother us because there were 5 of us in the house that night. After a few minutes I looked through the window. Her house was in the complete dark. Not one light was on. I found it strange because they never have all of their lights off. They sleep with their night light on. And there was no chance she would sleep in the complete dark when she was alone, and it wasn't even her bedtime. He was speaking without stopping to breathe. I thought he wanted to finish as quick as possible. I brought that to my wife's notice. We even considered calling her, just to check, but before we could do anything, we heard a scream. It was a horrible scream and it stopped midway. He stopped to breathe. That's when we called the cops. They cut back to the reporter. She now began to describe the crime scene. Her body was found in the middle of the living room. There was no sign of struggle. It looked like she didn't notice the killer breaking in. She was stabbed with a knife in the back a few times. Oh my God. I couldn't stop but say out loud, "That is so." I couldn't finish because I suddenly found myself in the complete dark. The power was out. I stood up and looked around to understand what was happening when I felt someone move around. Outside the living room, there was someone else in the house. Chapter 2. Continue reading. End of story. That is all for today. If you want to support my automated channel, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.